I'm listening today, August 13th in the morning, the podcast CBC. This podcast is on drugs. And one of the speakers said he couldn't see himself becoming an adult. It's one of the reasons that he got into drugs. And of course, that relates to the maturation process. And of course, I've been talking about that a lot, that our species no longer undergoes the Homo sapien maturation process and self-actualizes into our DNA's potential. I said before that the last human baby was likely born in the 1960s somewhere on Earth, and when I say that, I don't mean biologically. I mean cognitively, behaviorally, psychologically, because somewhere on Earth in the 1960s was possibly the last baby born that was in a community or that would have been small. It couldn't have been big because there wouldn't have been enough matured Homo sapiens to create a big community, but it would have been a small community somewhere where, and likely not religious, that would have been able to role model and mentor this child to manifest into being an Homo sapien. That's what I mean. Now, all of us, we realize that, well, I remember having these thoughts anyways, that it's hard to kind of take on the responsibility of one's life, like to become one's own life manager, growing up, becoming an adult if you want. And it has nothing to do with, passing a road test or getting to a certain age to buy alcohol or whatever it is that the norm often confuses for the maturation process or psychological development. But I remember thinking the anxiety of it all, right? The anxiety, for example, when I drove across Canada to come to BC when I was 32 years old, I still had fears that it wouldn't work out and that I'd call my mother and say, come get me. Although, don't want to insult her, but, her anxiety issues would have made it that this is not a responsible adult that would have come get me. And I wanted to be far away so that really do or die here, grow up or don't. And I don't think that I was at a bigger disadvantage, than the average person of my time and my similar demographics. It's just that I knew that there is potential to grow, right? As human beings, I'd already done the Sylvain Bergeron personal development course when I was 19, which was kind of a hint towards, what we're not getting at home or at school, and sometimes we have to pay for, and this is what it looks like, personal development. I knew that existed. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about my journey when I arrived on Vancouver Island, which I'm very proud of and which was very successful. I didn't die, although the first year I did think dying is not that bad, but I never got into drugs or alcohol or things like that, and I pursued my personal development, and a variety of doctors prescribed me medicines that I tried, and some work well in some ways. And then I realized at some point, I don't need that stuff, because I did the kind of personal development in relation to who I am as in identity and who the species I share DNA with, that is the social world on the planet, truly is, right? The human condition. And then I realized, okay, I'm actually doing okay. I'm pretty good compared to the norm. And that is a great sense of security that makes it that I knew I'm a grown-up, and I knew I could be very confident about being such a responsible adult role model that could be observed in videotape being this way without panicking, because it's who I now was. But I don't like that he said, although it makes sense and it's true to him and it's true to many people, that he didn't know if he could undergo this journey to become an adult, especially with, a lack of role models of responsible adults in our proto-societies. But the thing is how I feel now, though, is in the last few years, I've taken risks. I haven't been suicidal, but I've taken risks, and I've been very aware of these risks. And these risks included the possibility of dying or shortening the length of my life. And right now, I'm doing more blood tests that shows that maybe some of these things are catching up to me. And I have no regrets about that. And it's not because I fear becoming an adult. It's because I live among those that don't acknowledge they are not adults, and that I've gathered a decade worth of evidence that shows they are extremely unlikely to become adults. That means I've really done my part as an identity to self-actualize. I'm very proud of it. I've accomplished 3 things that I don't know anybody else that ever has. One of them is my theory on HSD, which explains the reality of the human condition and explains our devolution and our increasing inability to access the higher functions of our brain, meaning we can't self-correct or adapt as well as most other animals do when it comes to living on this planet in the biosphere. I've also been in the fetal position or deep depressions more than once. Even probably maybe I've been psychotic in some parts in really being in dysfunctional state, and rebuilt my brain to be better than the norm multiple times. And eventually I realized, hey, that challenge was huge. I don't know anybody else who's accomplished it at these levels. And I've said in the past that I've met people that were on really hard drugs, and then when they go on softer drugs, they try to teach me about their personal development as if I haven't already done more than them, and their inability to reference me and hear my story is some proof of it. And they think they're great and I should follow them. And then I would maybe think, hey, should I try to explain to that person I've already gone through those stages and beyond? I mean, I might not have started with doing hard drugs, but I've started with being in the fetal position a few times in my life and then rebuilding my brain to being above the norm. So that's the second achievement of 3. I'm not going to mention the third one that I have achieved that is amazing, that is worth my brain being studied, both through measuring instruments of the hardware of it, but also the software of it, in behavioral measurements, right? And if, for example, my medical issues right now makes people want to have me go somewhere else for further studies, I would say, what is your motivation? Can you listen to my motivation for what would make me say yes or no? And if they do, let's say, want to do MRIs that includes the brain and how I may function differently than the norm, I'm going to say, if our motivations match, I would definitely do that, especially if you help me cover the expenses. But I would only do it in the context of a research PhD, of which I am one of the candidates of this PhD, because it's too late now. I know my species can't learn from my teachings. They're gone. And often when I meet somebody that has some curiosity about what I have to say, that I talked about this before, I see them getting worse because they're overwhelmed with knowing this is them now and this is them that should be if, let's say, they walk the talk of caring for their kids or caring for the environment or being part of the solution and not the problem, for example. They go back even deeper into their HSD. So in a way, that's one of the signs we can't self-correct, because the more I talk about it to somebody that may or may not have the attention span or interest to hear about this theory, is I see them regress later on. And because this regression takes them a little bit more out of reality, and it's comforting and it's sad. It's sad because they had a motivation for a bit more reality, and when they got it, oh boy, you lose them. And it's not necessarily that they'll start taking drugs, it's that they will succumb more and more to the variety of human domestication syndromes that impacts their ability to have a well-functioning brain when it comes to the concept of, let's say, life management or being a responsible adult for their own offspring. So what they've never talked about in this topic of drugs is, let's say, safe places to do things. And they say, oh, well, if we don't have that, and let's say we do drugs and get a disease from a needle the day before we'd start treatment, what's the use? Well, That's really kind of ridiculous kind of logic. And there's also a lot of conversations that aren't being had. So, in a debate about this, I would say saved lives, many lives were saved. How do you define life? You're talking about like the body, the brain, the heart pumping? Or you're talking about living as a self-actualized human, quality of life, manifesting one's potential even at 50% seems unlikely. With pretty much everybody I meet is unlikely to ever reach 50% of their human potential in their entire lifetime. So it's not about this. It's about the conversations we're not having, and how safe places to do drugs only helps not really the addicts, but the also dysfunctional people that work in mental health, in politics, in policy setting, in administrative stuff, in law enforcement, in the justice system. Is it kind of simplifies their life, but it has nothing to do with the addicts or the mentally ill. They're not really their priorities, and they can't often advocate for their own good. So it's sad. It's sad that last year, or at the beginning of the year, is I'm learning about this treatment center in Kitimat, and what I'm finding out is that it's okay if people are still kind of on drugs while they're doing the program. So in a way, we've lowered our standards. When you legalize marijuana or cannabis or whatever, and when you make it normal to have people go inject things in their bodies instead of undergoing the maturation process as humans, yes, there's an ongoing devolution in every interconnected social service providing structure, and only adults can talk about this.